I wasn't gonna do a live stream until I figured out what the shit was going on with my computer to make me stream it. Oh, I'm streaming at 30 frames per second for some reason now. I was streaming at 7 earlier. I wasn't gonna stream anything. But something huge happened, everybody. It's the Korean War peace agreement. It happened in Panmunjom, Korea. I don't know. I don't know what to say. This is amazing. This is something. This is the end of an epoch. This is something that has been occurring since before I was born. Since maybe the time my parents were born. This peace agreement, this armistice, and light war was in place. And I'm really happy that North and South Korea have made peace. It's a good news for everybody in the world, really. North Korea, as any country, deserves their crack at having a happy existence or whatever. A good populace. A good result for the populace, we'll put it that way. What it's very handy for is giving the people a better chance at living, and everybody deserves that, right? And I view that as McDonald's and fucking hamburgers and joints and puppy dogs, but it's different for everybody. So let's get to the text of the bill. The Korean War Armistice Agreement. Holy shit, people, this is a thing. Agreement between the people, the Commander-in-Chief, United Nations Command on the one hand, and the Supreme Commander of Korean People's Army, and the Commander of the Chinese People's Volunteers on the other hand, concerning a military armistice in Korea. I guess it is an armistice again. But you know what? I'll take an armistice. The undersigned, the Commander-in-Chief, United Nations Command on the one hand, and the Supreme Commander of the Korean People's Army and commanders of the Chinese People's Volunteers on the other hand, in the interest of stopping the Korean conflict with its great toil of suffering and bloodshed on both sides, and with the objective of establishing an armistice which will ensure a complete cessation of hostilities and all acts of armed force in Korea until a final peaceful settlement is achieved, do individually, collectively, and mutually agree to accept to be bound and governed by the conditions and terms of armistice set forth in the following articles and paragraphs, which said conditions and terms are intended to be purely military in character and pertain solely to the belligerents in Korea. Peace in Korea. I hope you guys in North and South Korea enjoy it. Y'all, you want a fucking NBA team? I don't give a shit about the NBA, but who gives a fuck, right? You want one? You get one. It's fucking, that's the way it works. You hold it down, you get it. Military demarcation line and demilitarized zone. A military demarcation line shall be fixed, and both sides shall withdraw 2 kilometers from this line as to establish a demilitarized zone between the opposing forces. A demilitarized zone shall be established as a buffer zone to prevent the occurrence of incidents which might lead to resumption of hostilities. The military demarcation line is located as indicated on the attached map. This demilitarized zone is defined by northern and southern boundaries indicated on the attached map. The military demarcation line shall be plainly marked as directed by the Military Armistice Commission. Hereinafter established, the commanders of opposing sides shall have suitable markers erected along the boundary between the demilitarized zone and their respective areas. The Military Armistice Commission shall supervise the erection of all markers placed along the demarcation line and along boundaries of the demilitarized zone. The waters of Han Estuary shall be open to civil shipping of both sides, wherever one bank is controlled by one side and the other bank is controlled by the other side. The Military Armistice Commission shall prescribe rules for shipping in that part of the Han River estuary indicated on the attached map. Civil shipping on each side shall have unrestricted access to the land under military control of that side. Neither side shall execute any hostile act from within, from, or against the demilitarized zone. No person, military, civilian, shall be permitted to cross the demarcation line unless specifically authorized to do so by the Military Armistice Commission. No person military of civilian in the demilitarized zone shall be permitted to enter the territory under military control of either side unless specifically authorized to do so by the commander of into whose territory entry is sought. I think it's supposed to be or civilian instead of civilian. No person, military or civilian, shall be permitted to enter the demilitarized zone except persons concerned with the conduct of civil administrations. You know what we're going to change because this isn't Borderlands. We got to change some things, y'all. Hold on. Lord. This is the Panmunjom. I'm just gonna copy that shit. All your changes are being saved. All changes saved. Excellent. There we go. We're back here down to 10. Civil administration and relief in that part of the demilitarized zone, which is south of the military and the military demarcation line, shall be the responsibility of the Commander-in-Chief, United Nations Command, and civil administration of the relief in that part of the demilitarized zone, which is north of the military demarcation line, shall be joint responsibility of the Supreme Commander of the North Alright. We'll slow down. Civil administration relief in that part of the demilitarized zone, which is south of the military the military demarcation line, shall be the responsibility of the Commander-in-Chief, United Nations Command, and civil administration relief in that part of the demilitarized zone, which is north of the military demarcation line, shall be the joint responsibility of the Supreme Commander of the Korean People's Army and the Commander of the Chinese People's Volunteers. The number of persons, military or civilian, from each side who are permitted to enter the demilitarized zone for the conduct of civil administration and relief shall be determined by the respective commanders, but in no case shall the total number of authorized by either side exceed 1,000 persons at any time. The number of civil police and the arms carried by them shall be prescribed by the Military Armistice Commission. Other personnel shall not carry arms unless specifically authorized to do so by the Military Armistice Commission. Nothing contained in this article shall be constructed to prevent complete freedom of movement to and from within the demilitarized zone by the Military Armistice Commission. Its assistance, the Joint Observer Teams with their assistance, the Neutral Nations Supervisory Commission hereinafter established its assistance, the Neutral Nations Inspection Teams with their assistance, and the other persons, materials, and equipment specifically authorized to enter the demilitarized zone by the Military Armistice Commission. Convenience of the movement shall be permitted through the territory under the military control of either side, over any route necessary to move between points within the demilitarized zone where such points are not connected by roads lying completely within the demilitarized zone. I'm gonna go check on something that's in my oven. Literally. All right. Let's fuck. I thought my enchiladas would be heated all the way through. Not quite. Article 2. Concrete arrangements for ceasefire and armistice. A. General 12. The commanders of the opposing side shall order and enforce a complete cessation of all hostilities in Korea by all armed forces under their control, including all units and personnel of the ground, naval, and air forces, effective 12 hours after this armistice is signed. See paragraph 63 hereof for the effective date and hour of the remaining provisions of this armistice agreement. Phew. 13. In order to ensure the stability of the military armistice, so as to facilitate the attainment of peaceful settlement through the holding of both sides by a political conference at a high level, commanders of the opposing side shall, A. Within 72 hours after this armistice agreement becomes effective, withdraw all their military forces, supplies, equipment from the demilitarized zone, except otherwise provided herein. All demolitions, minefield, wire entanglements, and other hazards to the safe movement of personnel of the military armistice or its joint observer teams, military armistice commission or its joint observer teams known to exist within the demilitarized zone after the withdrawal of military forces therefrom, together with lanes known to be free of such a hazard, shall be reported to the MAC, Military Armistice Commission, by the commander of the side whose forces employ such hazards. Subsequently, additional safe lanes shall be cleared, and eventually, within 45 days after the termination of the 72-hour period, all such hazards shall be removed from the demilitarized zone as directed by the by under supervision of the Military Armistice Commission. At the termination of the 72-hour period, except for unarmed troops, authorized 45-day period to complete salvage operations under the Military Armistice Commission, agreed to by the MAC. We'll just call it MAC. Agreed to by the commanders of both opposing sides and personnel authorized under paragraphs 10 and 11 hereof. No personnel of either side shall be permitted to enter the demilitarized zone. Within 10 days after the armistice agreement becomes effective, withdraw all their military forces, supplies, and equipment from the rear and coastal islands and waters of Korea. Of Korea. On the other side, if such military forces are not withdrawn within the state limit, there is no mutually agreed valid reason for the delay. The other side shall have the right to take any action which deems necessary for the maintenance and security of security and order. The term coastal islands, as used above, refer to those islands which, though occupied one by one side at the time this armistice agreement becomes effective, were controlled by on the other side of June 24th, 1950, provided, however, that all islands lying north and west of the provincial boundary line between Jado and Gyeonggi-do shall be under the military control and of the Supreme Commander of the Korean People's Army, the Chinese People Volunteers, except for the islands groups of Pyongyang-do, I'm not going to read the coordinates, Taechong-do, Sochong-do, and Yeonpyeong-do, and Yudo, which shall remain under the military control of the Commander-in-Chief of the United Nations Command, and all the islands on the west coast of Korea lying above the mentioned boundary line shall remain under the military control of the Commander-in-Chief of the United Nations Command. See the introduction into Korea reinforcing military personnel. Provided, however, that the rotation of units and personnel, the arrival in Korea of personnel on a temporary duty basis, and the return of to Korea of personnel after short periods of leave or temporary duty outside of Korea shall be permitted. Within the scope below, rotation is defined as the replacement of units or personnel by other units or personnel who are commencing a tour of duty in Korea. Rotation personnel shall be introduced into and evacuated from Korea only through ports of entry enumerated in paragraph 43 hereof. Rotation shall be conducted on a man-for-man basis, provided that there are no more than 35,000 personnel in military service shall be admitted into Korea by either side in any calendar month under the rotation policy. Excuse me. No personnel of either side will be introduced into Korea if the introduction of such personnel will cause the aggregate of military personnel of that side admitted into Korea since the effective date of this armistice agreement to exceed the cumulative total of military personnel of that side who have departed from Korea since that date. Reports concerning arrivals and departures from Korea of military personnel shall be made daily to the Military Armistice Commission and the Neutral Nations Supervisory Commission. Such as reports shall include places of arrival and departure and the number of persons arriving at or departing each such place. The Neutral Nations Supervisory Commission, through its Neutral Nations inspection team, shall conduct supervision and inspection of the rotation of units authorized above at the ports of entry enumerated in paragraph 43 hereof. In order to justify the requirements for combat aircraft, armored vehicles, weapons, and ammunition to be introduced into Korea for replacement purposes, the reports concerning every incoming shipment of these items shall be made into the MAC and the NNSC, Military Armistice Commission, or Neutral Nations Supervisory Commission. That's what it is. Such reports shall include statements regarding the disposition of the items being replaced. Items to be replaced, which are removed from Korea, shall be removed only through the ports of entry enumerated in paragraph 43 hereof. The NNSC, through its Neutral Nations inspection team, shall conduct supervision and inspection of the replacement of combat aircraft, armored vehicles, weapons, and ammunition authorized above at the ports of entry enumerated in paragraph 43 hereof. Excellent. E. Ensure that personnel of their respective commands who violate any provisions of this armistice are adequately punished. F. In those cases where places of burial are a matter of record, graves are actually found to exist, permit graves registration personnel of the other side to enter within a definite time limit after the armistice agreement becomes effective the territory of Korea under their military control for the purposes of proceeding such graves to recover and evacuate the bodies of the deceased military personnel of that side, including deceased prisoners of war. The specific procedures and time limit for the performance of the above task shall be determined by the Military Armistice Commission. The commanders of the opposing side shall furnish the other side all available information pertaining to the places of burial of the deceased military personnel of the other side. Afford full protection and all possible assistance and cooperation to the Military Armistice Commission, Joint Observer Teams, Neutral Nations Supervisory Commission, Neutral Nations Inspection Teams in the carrying out of their functions and responsibilities hereinafter assigned, and accord to the Neutral Nations Inspection Teams full convenience of movement between the headquarters of the Neutral Nations Supervisory Commission and ports of entry enumerated in paragraph 43 hereof over main lines of the communication agreed upon by both sides. See map 4, and between the headquarters the headquarters of the Neutral Nations Supervisory Commission and the places where violations of this armistice agreement may have been reported to have occurred. In order to prevent unnecessary delays, the use of alternate routes and means of transportation will be permitted whether the main lines of communication are closed or impassable. H. Provides such logistic support, including communications and transportation facilities, as may be required by the Armistice Commission and the Neutral Nations Supervisory Commission and their teams. Each construct, operate, and maintain a suitable airfield in their respective parts of the demilitarized zone and the vicinity of the headquarters of the Military Armistice Commission. For such uses, as the Commission may determine. So, I don't know what to think, guys. Ensure that all members of other personnel with the Neutral Nations Supervisory Commission and Neutral Nations Reparation Commissions hereinafter established shall enjoy the freedom and facilities necessary for the proper exercise of their functions, including privileges, treatment, and immunities equivalent to those ordinarily enjoyed by accredited diplomatic personnel under international usage. This armistice agreement shall apply to all opposing forces under the military control of either side, which ground forces shall respect the demilitarized zone and the area of Korea under the military control of the opposing side. This armistice agreement shall apply to all opposing naval forces, which the naval forces shall respect the water contiguous to the demilitarized zone and to the land of the land. What is contiguous water, bro? Shit. And to the land of Korea under the military control of the opposing side. They probably have it mapped out. Shall not engage in a blockade of any kind of Korea. This armistice agreement shall apply to all opposing air forces, which air forces shall respect the airspace over the demilitarized zone and over the area of Korea under both military control of the opposing side, and over the waters contiguous to both. Responsibility for compliance with and enforcement of the terms and provisions of the armistice agreement that the signatories hereto establish their successors in command. The commanders are opposing sides shall establish within their respective commands all measures and procedures necessary to ensure their complete compliance with all the provisions hereof by all elements of their commands. They shall actively cooperate with one another and with the Military Armistice Commission and the Neutral Nations Supervisory Commission in requiring observance of both letter and spirit of the provisions of this armistice agreement. 18. Costs and the cost of operations of the Military Armistice Commission of the Neutral and of the Neutral Nations Supervisory Commission and of their team shall be equally shared by the two opposing sides. B. Armistice Commission. 1. Composition. 19. A military armistice composition is hereby established. The Military Armistice Commission, I said composition, whatever, shall be composed of 10 senior officers, 5 of whom shall be appointed by the Commander-in-Chief of the United Nations, and 5 who shall be appointed by the Supreme Commander, shall be appointed jointly by the Supreme Commander of the Korean People's Army and the Commander of the Chinese People's Volunteer Army. Of the 10 members, 3 from each side shall be general flag rank. There's 2 members of each side, maybe majors, generals, brigadier generals, colonels, or their equivalent. Members of the Military Armistice Commission shall be permitted to use staff and assistance as required. The Military Armistice Commission shall provide the necessary administrative personnel to establish secretariat charged with assisting the Commission by performing record keeping, secretarial, interpreting, and such other functions as the Commission may assign to it. Each side shall appoint to the secretary a secretary and an assistant secretary and such clerical. Man, my nose is running. I'm trying to clear it, guys. You guys can hear right now. Yeah, it's a little clogged. Oh, it's gonna get worse in a second. Secretary and the secretary and such clerical Interpreting such other functions as the commission may assign to it. Each side shall appoint to a secretary and secretary, assistant secretary, and such clerical specialized personnel as required by the secretary. Records shall be kept in English, Korean, and Chinese, all of which shall be equally authentic. The Military Armistice Commission shall be initially provided with and assisted by 10 joint observer teams, which may be reduced by the agreement of the senior members of both sides of the Military Armistice Commission. Each joint observer team shall be composed of not less than 4, no more than 6 officers of field grade, half of whom shall be appointed by the Commander-in-Chief of the United Nations, half of whom shall be appointed by the Commander-in-Chief of the United Nations Command, and half of whom shall be appointed jointly by the Supreme Commander of the Korean People's Army and the Commander of the Chinese People's Volunteers. Additional personnel required, such as drivers, clerks, and interpreters, shall be furnished by each side as required by functioning of the joint observer teams. The general mission of the Military Armistice Commission shall be to supervise the implementation of this Military Armistice Agreement and settle through negotiation any violations of this Armistice Agreement. The Military Armistice Commission shall locate its headquarters in the vicinity of Panmunjom. I think that's it, Panmunjom. Do they cut the M short? Like if I was saying like an American, I'd say like Panmunjom. But don't they cut their syllable? Never mind. I thought for some reason I think they cut their syllable short, but that's probably because I'm a high bastard. The Military Armistice Commission shall relocate its headquarters at another point with the demilitarized zone by agreement of the senior members of both sides on the commission. Operate as a joint organization without a chairman. Adopt such rules of procedure as it may from time to time deem necessary. Supervise the carrying out of the provisions of this armistice agreement pertaining to the demilitarized zone and the Han River estuary. Right. Han River estuary sounds like a great place to go fishing. Just saying. Just saying, I'd love to go fishing. Smoke joints, but I know I can't do that in Korea. You guys don't let me smoke joints in Korea? That's like I'd try. Like I'd try to get high in Korea. Dude, I don't want it. Yo, they don't fuck around with that down there. Direct operations of the joint observer teams. Dog, I could be a joint observer. Settle through negotiations any violations of the armistice agreement. Transmit immediately to the commanders of the opposing sides all reports of the investigations of violations of the armistice agreement and all other reports and records of proceedings received from the Neutral Nations Supervisory Commission. Give general supervision and direction to the activities of the Committee for Reparations of Prisoners of War and the Committee for Assisting the Return of Displaced Civilians hereinafter established. Act as intermediate in transmitting communications between the commanders of the opposing sides, provided, however, that the foregoing shall not be construed to preclude the commanders of both sides from communicating with each other by any means they may desire to employ. Sweet, bro. Y'all should kick each other dick pics. Like, bro, dick. You guys come back, bro. It's my dick. How you gonna go to war with each other after you've been sending each other dick pics? The answer is you don't. Peace made. Permanent styling. Because it's super awkward to be like, but hey, you got a nice cut to that hog, son. And then he doesn't want to kill you no more. And then there's some homoerotic shit happens. See? War solved. Provide credentials and distinctive insignia for his staff and his duties. And received marking for all vehicles, aircraft, vessels, and used in the performance of this mission. The mission of the Joint Observer Team shall be to assist the Military Armistice Commission in supervising the carrying out of the provisions of this agreement. Armistice agreement pertaining to the demilitarized zone in the Han estuary. Han River estuary. A Military Armistice Commission senior member of either side thereof is authorized to dispatch joint observer teams to investigate violations of this armistice agreement reported to have occurred in demilitarized zones of the Han River estuary, provided, however, that not more than one half of the joint observer teams which have not been dispatched by the Military Armistice Commission may be dispatched at one time by either side of the Commission. The Military Armistice Commission or the senior member of either side thereof is authorized to request a neutral nation supervisory commission to conduct special observations and inspections at places outside the demilitarized zone. Violations of this armistice agreement may have been reported to have occurred. 29. They didn't put a space there. Well, the Military Armistice Commission determines that a violation of this armistice agreement has occurred, shall immediately report such violation to the commanders of opposing sides. When the Military Armistice Commission determines that a violation of this armistice agreement has been corrected to its satisfaction, it so shall report to the commanders of opposing sides. The Military Armistice Commission shall meet daily. Recesses of not to exceed 7 days may be agreed upon by the senior members of both sides, provided that such recesses may be terminated on 24-hour notice by the senior member of either side. Copies of the record the proceedings of all Military Armistice Commissions shall be forwarded to the commanders of the opposing sides as soon as possible after each meeting. The Joint Observer Team shall make periodic reports to the Military Armistice Commission as required by the Commission, and in addition shall make such special reports and may be deemed necessary by them or as required by the Commission. The Military Armistice Commission shall maintain duplicate files of the reports and recordings of proceedings required by this armistice agreement. The Commission is authorized to maintain duplicate files of such other reports, records, etc., as may be necessary in the conduct of its business. Upon eventual dissolution of the Commission, on one side of the above file shall be turned over to each side. The Military Armistice Commission may take recommendations to the commanders of the opposing sides with respect to amendments or additions to the armistice agreement. Such recommended changes should generally be those designed to ensure a more effective armistice. See Neutral Nation Supervisory Commission. 1. Compositions. The Neutral Nation Supervisory Commission shall hereby be established. The Neutral Nation Supervisory Commission shall be composed of 4 senior officers, 2 of whom shall be appointed by neutral nations, nominated by the Commander-in-Chief of the United Nations, namely Sweden and Switzerland, and 2 of whom the neutral nations nominated by the Commander-in-Chief's Commander-in-Chief of the People's Korean Army and the Supreme Commander of People's Army, and Commander of the Chinese People's Volunteer, namely Poland and Czechoslovakia. Dope! Those are good choices, I think. The term neutral nations shall be herein is used defined as those nations whose combatant forces have not participated in the hostilities in Korea. Members appointed to the commission may be armed forces of the appointing nations. Each member shall be an alternate member to designate an alternate member to attend meetings for which any reason the principal member is unable to attend. Such alternate members shall be the same nationality as their principals. The Neutral Nation Supervisory Commission may take action whenever the number of members present from the neutral nations nominated by one side is equal to the number of members present from the neutral nations nominated by the other side. Members of the Neutral Nations Supervisory Committee shall be permitted to use staff assistance furnished by neutral nations as required. These staff assistants may be appointed as alternate members of the commission. The neutral nations shall be requested to furnish the Neutral Nations Supervisory Commission with the necessary administrative personnel to establish a secretariat charged with assisting in commissioning by performing the necessary record-keeping, secretarial, interpreting, and such other functions as the commission may assign to it. The Neutral Nations Supervisory Commission shall initially be provided with and assembled by 20 of the neutral nations inspection teams, which number may be reduced by agreement of the senior members of both sides on the Military Armistice Commission. The Neutral Nations inspection team shall be responsible to and report to and shall be subject to the direction of the Neutral Nations Supervisory Commission only. Each Neutral Nations inspection team shall be composed of not less than 4 officers, preferably field grade, half of whom shall be neutral nations nominated by the Commander-in-Chief of the United Nations, and half of whom shall be the neutral nations nominated jointly by the Supreme Commander and the People's Korean Army and the Commander of the Chinese People's Volunteers. Members appointed to the Neutral Nations inspection team may be from the armed forces as appointed. In order to facilitate the functioning of the teams, sub-teams composed of not less than 2 members, one of whom shall be from a neutral nation nominated by the Commander-in-Chief, the United Nations, and one whom shall be from a neutral nation nominated by the Supreme Commander of Korean People's Army and the Commander of Chinese People's Volunteers, may be formed as circumstances require. Additional personnel such as drivers, clerks required by the team to perform the mission shall be furnished by the commander of each side as required. The demilitarized zone and in the demilitarized zone and in the territory under his military control, the neutral nations supervisory commission may provide itself with and the neutral nations inspection team with such of the above personnel as shall personnel of the same neutral nations which the Neutral Nations Supervisory Commission is composed. 2. Functions and authority. I gotta go check on something again in my oven. Alright, we're back. Sorry about that, y'all. My potatoes were done. And so I made a little chivy thing for them, took some chives, chopped them up, threw it in some Greek yogurt. Little chivy Greek yogurt thing I've got going on here. It should be alright. I use Greek yogurt. I use Greek yogurt instead of sour cream. I'm actually, this is the first video, you might think I'm fat as shit. Nah, I'm only fat as shit on the inside. My soul. I do too much crazy shit. 41. The missions of the Neutral Nations Supervisory Committee, and shall be to carry out the functions of supervision, observation, inspection, and investigation as stipulated in subparagraphs 13C and D and paragraph 28 hereof, and to report the result of such supervision, observation, inspection, and investigation to the Military Armistice Commission. The Neutral Nations Commission shall... Let me take a little whack of these taters here. Alright. That's alright. Located its headquarters in proximity to the headquarters of the Military Armistice Commission. Adopt such rules of procedure as it may from time to time deem necessary. C. Conduct through its members neutral nations inspection teams the supervision and inspection of as provided for in subparagraphs 13C and 13D of this armistice agreement at the ports of entry enumerated paragraph 43 hereof, and special observations and inspections provided for paragraph 28 hereof at those places where violations of this armistice have been reported. The inspection of combat aircraft, armored vehicles, weapons, and ammunition by the neutral nations inspection team shall be such as to enable them to properly ensure that reinforcing combat aircraft, armored vehicles, weapons, and ammunition shall not be introduced into Korea, but this shall not be constructed as authorizing inspection teams, examinations, or of any secret designs of characteristics of combat aircraft, armored vehicle, weapon, or ammunition. So they're not trying to proliferate, top secret military intel. I get it. D. Direct and supervise the operations of the neutral nations inspection teams. E. Station 5 neutral nations inspection teams at the ports of entry enumerated in paragraph 43 hereof, located in the territory under the military control of the Commander-in-Chief, United Nations Command, and 5 neutral nations inspection teams at the ports of entry enumerated in paragraph 43 hereof, located in the territory under the military control of the Supreme Commander and the Korean People's Army and the Commander of the Chinese People's Volunteer Army, and established initially 10 mobile neutral nations inspection teams in reserve, stationed in the general vicinity of the headquarters of the Neutral Nations Supervisory Commission, which number may be reduced by the agreement of the senior members of both sides of the Military Armistice Commission. Not more than half of the mobile neutral nations inspection teams shall be dispatched at any one time in accordance with the request of senior members of either side on the Military Armistice Commission. Subject to the provisions of the preceding subparagraphs, conduct without delay investigations of reported violations of this armistice agreement agreement, including such investigations of reported violations of this armistice agreement as may be requested by the Military Armistice Commission or by a senior member of either side of the Commission. G. Provide a whack at a potato. That's a lot of potato. Requested by the Military Armistice Commission or by the senior member of either side on the Commission, provide credentials and distinctive insignia for its staff and its neutral nations, inspection teams, and a distinctive marking for all vehicles, aircraft, and vessels used in the performance of this mission. 43. Neutral nations inspection teams shall be stationed at the following ports of entry: territory under the military control of the United Nations: Incheon, Taegu, Busan, Kangnung, Kunsan. Territory under the control of the People's Korean Army and the People's Chinese Volunteers. Sinyuju, Chongjin, Hungnam, Manpo, and Sinanju. Excuse me. I'm quite hungry. These neutral nations inspection teams shall be recorded full convenience of the movement within areas and over the routes of communication set forth on the attached map. Map 5. Three. General. The Neutral Nations Supervisory Commission shall meet daily. Recesses of not to exceed 7 days may be agreed upon by the members of the Neutral Nations Supervisory Commission, provided that such recesses may be terminated on 24-hour notice by any member. Copies of the records proceeding of all the meetings of the Neutral Nations Supervisory Commission shall be forwarded to the Armistice Commission as soon as possible after each meeting. Records shall be kept in English, Korean, and Chinese. Neutral Nations inspection teams shall make periodic reports concerning the results of their supervision, observations, and inspections. Investigations to the Neutral Nations Supervisory Commission is required by the Commission. In addition, shall make such special reports as may be deemed necessary by them, or as may be required by the Commission. Reports shall be submitted by a team as a whole, but may be also submitted by one or more individual members thereof, provided that the reports submitted by one or more individual members thereof shall be considered as information only. Okay. Why not hear from them as individuals and as a collective? There's probably a reason. Copies of the reports made by the Neutral Nations inspection teams shall be forwarded to the Military Armistice Commission by the Neutral Nations Supervisory Commission without delay, and in the language in which received. They shall not be delayed by the process of translation or evaluation. The Neutral Nations Supervisory Commission shall evaluate such reports at the earliest practicable time, shall forward their findings to the Military Armistice Commission as a matter of priority. The Military Armistice Commission shall not take final action with regard to any such report until the evaluation thereof has been received from the Neutral Nations Supervisory Commissions, members of the Neutral Nations Supervisory Commission, and of its teams shall be subject to the appearance before the Military Armistice Commission at the request of the senior member of either side on the Military Armistice Commission for clarification of any reports submitted. 48. The Neutral Nations Supervisory Commission shall maintain duplicate files of the reports and recordings proceedings required by this Armistice Agreement. The Commission is authorized to maintain duplicate files of such other reports, records, etc. as may be necessary in the conduct of its business. Upon eventual dissolution of the Commission, as one set above the files shall be turned over to each side. What set of the above files shall be turned over to each side. Neutral Nations Supervisory Commission may take recommendations to the Military Armistice Commission with respect to amendments or additions to the Military Armistice Agreement. Such recommendation changes should generally be those designed to ensure a more effective armistice. The Neutral Nations Supervisory Commission thereof shall be authorized to communicate with any other member of the Military Armistice Commission. Article 3 relating to prisoners of war. The release and reputation of all prisoners of war held in custody of each side at the time of this armistice agreement becomes effective. Recent reparation, not reputation, becomes effective. Shall be effected in conformity with the signing of provisions agreed upon by both sides prior to the signing of this agreement. Within 60 days after this agreement becomes effective, each side shall, without offering any hindrance, directly reparate and hand over in groups all those of prisoners of war in its custody who insist on the reparation to the side to which they belong at the time of capture. Reparation shall be accomplished in accordance with the related provisions of this article. In order to expedite the reparations process of such personnel, each side shall, prior to the signing of the armistice agreement, exchange total numbers by nationalities or personnel to be directly repatriated. Each group of prisoners of war delivered to the other side shall be accompanied by rosters prepared by nationality, include name, rank, if any, and or internment or military serial number. Each side shall release all those remaining prisoners of war who are not directly repatriated from its military control and from its custody, and hand them over to the Neutral Nations Reparations Commission for disposition in accordance with the provisions in the Annex Hetero terms of reference for Neutral Nations Reparations Commission. So that there may be no misunderstanding owing to... Oh! Balls, what was that? That's somewhat important. A knife. So that there may be no misunderstanding owing to the equal use of three languages, the active delivery of prisoner of war by one side to the other side shall, for the purposes of the armistice agreement, shall be called reparation in English, Songhwan in Korean, and Chen Che Fan in Chinese, notwithstanding the nationality or place of residence of such prisoner of war. Each side ensures that it will not employ in acts of war. The Korean conflict, any prisoner of war released in the Korean conflict, any prisoner of war released and reparated in incident to the coming effect of the agreement. Okay. All sick and injured prisoners who insist upon reparation shall be reparated with priority insofar as possible. There shall be captured medical personnel concurrently with the sick, and there shall be captured medical personnel reparated concurrently with the sick and injured prisoners of war, so as to provide medical care and attendance en route. Reparation of all prisoners of war required by subparagraph 51A hereof shall be completed within a time of 60 days after this armistice agreement becomes effective. Within this time limit, each side undertakes to complete the reparation of the above mentioned prisoners of war in its custody at the earliest predictable time. Panmunjom is designated as the place where prisoners of war will be delivered and is received by both sides. Additional places of delivery and reception of prisoners of war in the demilitarized zone may be designated if necessary. The Committee for Reparation of Prisoners of War. By the Committee of Reparations of Prisoners of War. 56. A committee for the reparation of prisoners of war is hereby established. It shall be composed of 6 field grade officers, 3 of whom shall be appointed by the Commander-in-Chief of the United Nations, 3 of whom shall be commanded by Korean, Chinese, blah 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 blah. This committee, under the general supervision and direction of the Military Armistice Commission, shall be responsible for coordinating the specific plans of both sides for the separate reparation of prisoners of war and for the supervision, the execution of both sides and of both powers, of all the provisions, of this armistice agreement relating to the reparations of prisoners of war. It shall be the duty of this committee to coordinate the timing of the arrival of prisoners of war at the places of delivery and reception of the prisoners of war from the prisoners of war camps to both sides, to make, when necessary, such special arrangements as be required with regard to transportation and welfare of sick, injured prisoners of war, to coordinate with the Joint Red Cross teams established in 57 hereof, in assisting the reparation of prisoners of war, to supervise the implementation of the arrangements for the actual reparations of prisoners of war stipulated in paragraphs 53 and 54 hereof, to select, when necessary, additional places of delivery and receptions of the prisoners of war, and to carry out such other related functions are as required by the reparations of the prisoners of war. For the reparation. 1. Unable to reach an agreement on any matter relating to its responsibilities, the Committee for Reparations of Prisoners of War shall immediately refer such matter to the Military Armistice Commission for decision. The Committee for Reparations of Prisoners of War shall maintain its headquarters in the proximity to the headquarters of the Military Armistice Commission. The Committee of Prisoners of War shall be dissolved by the Military Armistice Commission upon the completion of the program reparation of prisoners of war. Of the program of reparation for prisoners of war. Immediately after this armistice agreement becomes effective, Joint Red Cross teams composed of representatives of the National Red Cross Societies of countries contributing forces to the United Nations Command on one hand, and representatives of the Red Cross Society of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea and the Red Cross blah 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 of China. The Red Cross and Joint Red Cross team shall assist in the execution of both sides of those provisions of this armistice agreement relating to the reparation of the prisoners of war specified in subparagraph 51 hereof, who is insisted upon reparation by the performance of such humanitarian services are necessary and desirable for the welfare of prisoners of war. To accomplish this task, the Joint Red Cross teams shall provide assistance in the delivering and receiving of prisoners of war by both sides at places of delivery and reception of both prisoners of war, and shall visit prisoners of war camps, both sides, to comfort the prisoners of war. On both sides, of both sides. The Joint Red Cross team shall be organized as set forth below. One team composed of 20 members, namely 10 representatives from the National Red Cross societies of each side, to assist in delivering the prisoners of war to both sides at the places of delivery and reception of the prisoners of war. The chairman The chairmanship of this team alternate daily between the representative Red Cross societies, two sides. The work and services of this team shall be coordinated by the Committee of Reparations of the Prisoners of War. One team shall be composed of 60 members, namely 30 representatives from respective sides, to visit the prisoners of war camps under administration of the United Nations Command. This team may provide services to prisoners of war while en route from the prisoners of war camps to places of delivery and reception of prisoners of war. Representative of the Red Cross Society of a nation contributing to build forces to the United Nations Command shall United Nations contributing forces to the United Nations Command shall serve as the chairman of this team. In order to facilitate the functioning of each Joint Red Cross team, sub-teams composed of not less than 2 members of each team with an equal number of representatives, and each side may be formed as circumstances require. Additional personnel such as drivers, clerks, interpreters, and such equipment may be required by the Joint Red Cross teams to perform their missions shall be furnished by the commander of each side to the team operating in the territory under his control. Whether jointly agreed upon by the military representatives of both sides and Joint Red Cross team, the size of such team may be increased or decreased subject to the confirmation of the Committee of Reparation and Prisoners of War. The commander of each side shall cooperate fully with Joint Red Cross teams in the performance of their functions and undertakes to ensure the security of the Joint Red Cross team in area under his military control. The commander of each side shall provide such logistic, administrative, communications facilities as may be required, operating the territory under his military control. The Joint Red Cross team shall be dissolved upon the completion of the program of reparation of all the prisoners in the war specified in subparagraph 51A hereof. 58. The commander of each side shall furnish to the commander of the other side as soon as practicable, but not later than 10 days after the armistice agreement becomes effective, the following information concerning prisoners of war: complete data pertaining to the prisoners of war who escaped since the effective date of data last exchange, insofar as practicable information regarding name, nationality, or rank, other identification data, date and cause of death, and place of burial of those prisoners of war who died while in custody. Prisoners of war who died while in custody. If any prisoners of war escape or die after the effective date of the supplementary information specified above, the detaining side shall furnish to the other side through the Committee for Reparation of the Prisoners of War the data pertaining thereto in accordance with the provisions of subparagraph 58 hereof. Such data shall be furnished at 10-day intervals till the completion of the program, delivery and reception of prisoners of war. Any escaped prisoner of war who returns to the custody of the detaining side after the completion of the program of delivery and reception of prisoners of war shall be delivered to the Military Armistice Commission for disposition. All civilians who at this time of this armistice agreement become effective are in the territory under the control of the Commander-in-Chief of the United Nations, and on June 24th of June 1950 resided in the north of the military demarcation line. Established this in the armistice agreement is if they desired to return home, can be assisted by the Commander-in-Chief, United Nations Command, to return to the area north of the military demarcation line. And all civilians who at the time this armistice agreement becomes effective are in the territory under the military control of the Supreme Commander of the Korean People's Army, Supreme Commander of the Chinese People's Volunteer, and Chinese People's Volunteer, who on the 24th of June 1950 resided south of the military demarcation line. Established this in this armistice shall, if they desire to return home, be permitted and assisted by the Supreme Commander of the People's Korean Army and the Commander of the People's Chinese Volunteers, and to the area south of the demarcation line. The commander of each side shall take responsibility for publicizing widely enough throughout the territory under his military control the contents of the provisions of this subparagraph, and for calling upon the appropriate civil authorities to give him necessary guidance and assistance to all civilians who desire to return home. All civilians, foreign nationality, whom at this time of this armistice agreement become effective, are in territory under the military control of the Supreme Commander of the Korean People's Army and the Commander of the Chinese People's Army. If they desire to proceed to the territory under Commander-in-Chief and the United Nations Command, be permitted and assisted to do so. All civilians, foreign nationality, who at this time the armistice agreement becomes effective, are in the territory under control of the military chief and the command and United Nations Command, shall, if they desire, proceed to the territory under military control of the Supreme Commander of the Korean People's Army and the Commander of the Chinese People's Volunteers, be permitted to do so. The commander of each side be responsible for publicizing widely throughout the territory under his military control contents of the provisions of this subparagraph, and for calling upon the appropriate civil authorities to give necessary guidance and assistance to all such civilians and foreign nationality who desire to proceed to the territory under the military control of the commander of the other side. Measures to assist the return of civilian provided in subparagraph 59. A. Hereof and the movement of civilians provided in subparagraph 59b hereof shall be commenced by both sides as soon as possible after this armistice agreement. D. A committee for the assisting of the return of displaced civilians is hereby established. It shall be comprised of 4 officers of field grade, 2 of whom shall be jointly appointed by, it was 2 and 2, by the two sides. This committee shall, under the general supervision and direction of the Military Armistice Commission, be responsible for coordinating the specific plans of both sides I lost my place. Specific plans of both sides for assistance to the return of the above-mentioned civilians. It shall be the duty of this committee to make any necessary arrangements, including those of transportation, for expediting and coordinating, through which the above-mentioned civilians will cross the military demarcation line, to arrange for security at the crossing points, and will carry out such other functions as are required to accomplish the return of the home above-mentioned civilians. When unable to reach an agreement on any matter relating to its responsibilities, the Committee for Assistance assisting the return of displaced civilians shall immediately refer such matter to the Military Armistice Commission for decision. The Committee for Assisting the Return of Displaced Civilians shall maintain the headquarters in proximity to the Military Armistice Commission. The Committee for Assisting the Return of Displaced Civilians shall be dissolved by the Military Armistice Commission upon the fulfillment of this mission. Article 4. Recommendations: the governments concerned on both sides, in order to ensure peaceful settlements of the Korea question, the military commanders of both sides hereby recommend that the governments of the countries concerned on both sides, that within 3 months of the armistice is signed and becomes effective, a political conference of high level of both sides be held by representatives appointed respectively to settle through negotiation questions of withdrawal of all foreign forces from Korea, the peaceful settlement of the Korean question, etc. Article 5. Miscellaneous amendments and additions to this armistice agreement must be mutually agreed to by the commanders of the opposing sides. Articles and paragraphs. The articles and paragraphs of this armistice shall remain in effect until expressly suspended by the military, either by mutually acceptable amendments and additions by provision in an appropriate agreement for a peaceful settlement at a political level between both sides. 63. All provisions of this armistice agreement over paragraph 12 shall become effective at 2200 hours, July 27th, 1953. And I think I read the wrong accord here. Well, I think this is the one that is not, whatever. It was interesting nonetheless, eh?